hear you.
Seeing as it's 6:01, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the special presentation to approve of the 2019 financial statements. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
It's made by Councillor Murray,
I'll second it.
seconded by Councillor Allison. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. I'd like to turn this over now to Teed Saunders and Doyle, Andrew Logan, and Megan Porter.
Thank you very much. I think last week or the week before, the council mayor should have received a copy of the draft financial statements. Does everybody have those with them?
Yes, we do. I do.
Would it be easier? So we can either use the paper copies or we could do a screen share, whatever you prefer.
Sorry, paper copy or
Screen share. I can also bring them up on the screen here if that's easier for the.
has everybody got their paper copy?
Yep.
Yeah, we're all set with the paper copy.
Perfect. All right. I thought what we could do tonight is take a few minutes. We'll try to keep it high level unless there's some specific questions you have on any variances or anything in there that catches your eye. I brought the brains of the operation, Megan Porter, along today, so in case there's any really hard questions, she gets to answer them, not me. Once we run through the statements, I'll give you some comments that I have on the results and sort of some comparative to other municipalities that we work on, and just give you some insight as to the results for 2019. And then I thought we could spend a few minutes just talking a little bit about the audit and how it went this year. And we do have a management letter that we intend to issue. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation. And I think this is pretty fluid. So if anybody has any questions or comments or is not getting what I'm saying, just stop and ask. I think it's probably just as easy as that, because they are a really long set of financial statements and there's a lot of information in here. So it's best just to ask questions as we go along. Sound good?
Sounds great.
So the first thing I thought we would quickly chat about is just the audit opinion at the start of the statements on page 1. At the beginning of that auditor's report, the very first paragraph is our opinion. And as we've expressed in 2018, again in 2019, we're basically expressing what we call a clean audit opinion. And it's indicated there in that second paragraph that starts in our opinion. So no issues with the audit. No, there's nothing really left outstanding right now. We've got all our audit evidence gathered and everything is finalized from our end. And once council approves the statements, we're ready to publish the financial statements. So a clean audit opinion, always a good thing. A couple of pages down from that on page 3 of the package, you should find the statement of operations. It's another fancy name for the income statement. And there's a lot of detail on the back of the statements in the very last note, note 23, that gives us a lot of breakdown on these figures. So I'll just make a couple of quick comments here. At the bottom line, we had a surplus, and again, this is the accounting surplus, not the provincial funding model surplus, but the accounting surplus of almost $150,000. And that exceeded our budget by almost $500,000. And the very simple explanation for that is that we received a significant amount of federal and provincial grant money last year for infrastructure projects, primarily the gas tax and some green initiatives. And that totaled almost $500,000. And we don't budget that when the budget's put together, because it's never for certain. And generally when those funds come in, they're used to fund capital expenditures anyway. So you're not going to see them in the annual expenses. They go towards the cost of fixed assets, of replacing infrastructure, replacing utility projects, et cetera, things like that. So if you see that big swing on the deficit between the budget and the actual results and say, my gosh, we missed it by $500,000, it's really quite easy. It's just those grants that have come in. And we'll see that when we get into note 23. There was one observation that jumped out at me when I looked at the income statement. And this is a really good indicator of the quality of your accounting system and of your financial management. And if you look at your expenditures for the year, you can see the total that was budgeted was $3,307,000. We ended up at $3,338,000 for the year. And some of that's related to some assets that we sold. So if you back that out, We only missed budget by $4,000 on a $3.3 million spend. And even though individually there's some variances within the categories, overall, I mean, that's a really remarkable outcome to budget and manage the budget within $4,000. We said to Jason, that's really good management. And he said, well, some of it's good luck, but needless to say, the results are very good. And as I said, indicative of a really strong accounting and financial system. So that's good for you folks, especially as the folks that are responsible for the overall financial governance of the municipality. It's good to know that you've got a good system in place and that the information you're seeing throughout the year is accurate. Any questions on that?
No.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm good.
Awesome. The next page, page 4, this is we call it the consolidated statement of financial position. It's a sort of a hybrid balance sheet that came out a few years ago when the public sector accounting rules were adopted. Essentially, it just shows you sort of your financial assets. So the cash in the bank, receivables, any loans that you have outstanding, any payables are listed there. And the first subtotal is a number called net debt. And you can see it's $1,695,000 this year. It actually decreased year over year. So that's always a favorable indicator of positive financial results. Your overall net debt position has decreased. Underneath that, we have what we call our non-financial assets. So that's all the monies and funds that have been invested in infrastructure in the towns, the roads, the streets, the sidewalks, the water system, the sewer systems. So over the years, there's been almost $26 million invested, and we have calculated depreciation of around 13 million, leaving sort of net assets of 12.6. And a counselor once asked me, what does that mean? What you come to the bottom here, we have this accumulated surplus of $10.9 million. What does that mean? And when you think about it, it really represents the sort of the investment that the town has made in its infrastructure that has not been used up yet. So it's this roads, it's the utilities, it's the water system, it's the sewer system, it's the net depreciated value. I mean, it's a bit theoretical because nothing ever lasts according to what it's supposed to, but on a calculated basis, that is what is remaining in the investment that the town has made in its assets and infrastructure. So yet to be consumed. Last year, we invested almost $935,000 in assets, about $500,000 into the utility system and about $440,000, or sorry, $440,000 into the utility system, about $500,000 into the general fund. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about those asset additions in a few minutes. So really that's it. I guess the takeaway from that page is that the overall financial indicators for the town have improved year over year. I'm not going to talk about page 5. That's just a reconciliation of net debt. I do want to talk quickly about page 6. The town's overall cash position improved in 2019. And again, that's a bit of a result of favorable operating surplus. If you look at that schedule, you can see starting at the top of the page, we've got our sort of our operating transactions. We have our surplus. We add back depreciation because that's not really a cash expense. And then there was some receivables and some other things that we collected on. And basically from our operating, we generated 1.3 million in cash flow. So that's money that came into the town. And then we spent, as I said earlier, 935,000 on new assets. So that's a whole bunch of different things, roads, streets, tractors, backhoes, all that kind of stuff. And we sold them. We sold $80,000 worth of used assets. We also had to pay down debt under financing transactions. That's another 368,000. So if you net all that together, what came in and what went out, we actually improved our cash over year by about $80,700. So a little bit more money in the bank at the end of the year.
Very good.
Okay, makes sense?
Makes sense.
Perfect. All right. Unless anybody wants to go through the accounting policy notes, which I highly doubt, I'm going to skip over a few of these pages and kind of get into page 11. And this is just some supplementary schedules that we have related to those balances on the balance sheet. So I mentioned a second ago, the cash improved, and you can see we've got a chunk of that sitting in our reserve funds. We've got some money sitting in gas tax money that we've received that we haven't spent yet. And then we've got about 175,000 roughly in just open current account to be used to help finance payable around the town. Some money outstanding. The next note 4 just talks a little bit about some money that's outstanding from the government. That first one, CRA, that would be an HST refund. It's due back at the end of December. A little bit of money from Public Works. The next note's money due from the province. Very similar to prior years in terms of the components. A lot of it's got to do with grant money that's yet to come in that we've spent. You can see some of them listed there, the IBA Green Infrastructure, Clean Water and Wastewater, some other things there. We do have, note 6 indicates we have one interim bank loan outstanding at the end of December 2019 of 240 grand. That will be eventually replaced by a debenture. And there was a balance on the credit cards. Some of the stuff that we have to put in is required note disclosure for accounting policies. I'm going to skip over the deferred revenue note. Really, all the deferred revenue note is there's a chunk of money that you've received up front that you haven't spent. Most of it's related to gas tax funds that will come in. Note 8 is just some details on the obligations under capital lease for some of your equipment. On the long-term debt note, that's a listing of the current debentures that are still outstanding. There were no new debentures issued in 2019, so our debt decreased by about $188,000 overall. I'm going to scroll through here. On page 16, near the bottom of that page, there is a new note, number 17, subsequent event, that is going in all our audit files, talks a little bit about COVID and how we cannot, at this time, assess the impact on your financial situation, but that there may be an impact. I guess it depends on the type of entity. Some of our clients are really experiencing some tough go with the whole COVID thing. Others are flourishing. So it just really depends on your industry and your sector. But that's a note that we've put in just to indicate to the reader that there is some uncertainty in the numbers. After this, the next several pages are schedules that are in there to help mostly the province understand the financial results, but some of them are useful. The next one on page 17, note 18, is some details on our assets. And as I mentioned earlier, we spent about $935,000 last year. And you can see under the second line down gives you an indicator where that money was spent. So basically all across the board, really. And I'll point out that of that $900,000 that was spent last year, about $640,000 came from operational revenues. It's a significant amount of money spent out of on the operations on those assets. Okay. Note 19 is a breakdown of our revenues and expenses by the different segments. So our different sort of funds or departments, if you will, that we have. So this is very typical, in terms of the results. We've got a little deficit in general fund, a little deficit in productive, surplus in transportation. A lot of that's got to do with the conditional transfers that came from government. If you back those out, transportation is actually running in a deficit. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is in a second. But overall, we ended the year, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we had $150,000 accounting surplus. This next schedule, for anybody that's been around long enough in the municipal world and remembers the old way statements were done, this is a schedule that just reconciles the accounting surplus of $150,000 to what the surplus would be under the provincial funding model. So the primary difference is that the provincial funding model doesn't account for depreciation on assets. So we add that back. And as you can see from this schedule, we ended up the year with a $1,077,000 surplus under the provincial funding model. That $1 million surplus was spent on paying down our loans. That was about $188,000. We also paid back some short-term debt we had in the books of about $150,000. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we got another $640 on assets. So pretty much all of that $1 million was spent on either debt retirement or capital expenditures. And we ended up the year with a small surplus of about 80,000, which is why the cash balance increased. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. Next page is your statement of reserves. We'll jump this year. We went up about $11,000 in the reserves. There was a small transfer and then some interest earned on the accounts. So we're sitting on about 286,000 in reserves at the end of 2019. All right. I'm going to skip over. Okay, I'm going to just go to page 23. So this is the last note in the financial statement, and this is really gives you all of the detail on the revenues and expenditures for the year. As I mentioned when we were looking at the income statement, there were some discrepancies or variances within each sort of section, but overall we had a very good year in terms of meeting the budget. Under our revenue, this stuff is all pretty much spot on. The only thing that would be causing variances would be miscellaneous revenues or unknown contributions that may have come in during the year, things that were not budgeted. And you can see in the middle of that page or halfway down, we have these conditional transfers from government agencies. So this is the gap in infrastructure money from the feds and the province that we don't budget in the budget, because again, we don't know if we're going to get this stuff. We don't know how much we're going to get. And when it comes in, it generally goes straight out for capital expenditure. So we got 495,000 last year on a budget of 650. And of that 495, 470 of it went to pay for new assets. Okay. I don't think there's anything else in there that jumps out on revenue. On the next page, we get into some of the expenditure categories. I got to make a comment how your external audit and accounting fees are down this year and down against budget. I'll just plug ourselves and reporter for doing a great job. The general government services were under budget by about $17,000, and there really isn't anything that jumps out. A lot of small variances, but generally all to the positive. So that particular department finished well for the year. Protective services, which is the next on page 25, had some challenges. According to the notes we have in our audit file, if you look at the number of incidents that occurred in 2018 versus 2019, there was almost 1,000 more incidents in 2019, and that drives up your personnel costs and other operating costs. So you can see that in this schedule here, where our personnel costs have jumped to almost $80,000 in a budget of 52, and the prior year of around 52. So that has a lot of bearing on it.
Yeah.
Also an area that's hard to budget for. But when we get to the bottom, there were some areas that we did pick up. So overall protective services was only 14,000 over budget. So still not a bad situation. Transportation, another area where you can see a lot of fluctuation based on weather, based on breakdowns and all kinds of things that are a bit unpredictable. We noted this year that under the transportation services, you can see general equipment costs jumped up almost $20,000 over budget. Significant repair and maintenance to some of the equipment, a truck in particular, some things that were unbudgeted. And then when we get down under our road transport costs, you can see labor was up. Some of the costs on roads and streets were up. And again, salt and sand up over budget. Again, very unpredictable. Those items are generally hard to budget until you get a bit of a trend on the go, and it can drive your costs up. So transportation services was up 112,000 over plan. So pretty significant. All right, I'm on page 26. Not a lot of, there was some changes I see under the public health area where we were over planned by about 20 grand. Megan, does that one jump off your head? I can't remember any particular reason why that was up.
Well, this year they started paying for the equipment leases. In priors they hadn't been, they probably should have been. Jason, I think you can speak to that. There was one of the doctors, you didn't want him to feel like he owned the equipment, so you started paying for the leases directly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Changes there at the medical center.
So that drove up, I think that was about $10,000. I remember the number. Dealt with most of that.
Yeah.
Okay. The rest of the schedules are there. Recreation was under budget by 27,000. Some repair and maintenance costs were lower than planned and lower than the prior year. Some disbursements that were planned were not done, so we ended up with a favorable surplus there. And the very last page is the water and sewer costs for the year. Significantly under budget by about $76,000, and really most of it's around labor and administrative costs. So not one big thing jumped out, but there's a lot of smaller positive variances throughout the year. So that's it really. There's an awful lot of detail there, and I was pretty quick running through it. But does anybody have any questions on those results or any of those numbers that they wanted to talk about? I guess from my opinion, you know, a surplus. Your expenditure budget was pretty much spot on, and your net debt position and overall surplus position improved year over year. So financially, it was a pretty good year. Not too many major upsets that weren't controlled by cutting costs in other areas or seeking additional funding. All right. What time do we have here? 6:23. Okay. I guess if there are no questions on the financial statements, I'll just chat quickly on the audit. I'll let Megan talk a little bit, but obviously we're a little later than usual getting this done this year. We started the field work about a month ago, I guess, middle of July roughly, when we came down for our visit, which is, I think, it's about 3 months off of where we were last year. So we got through things really well, you know, and here we are basically a month later sitting down with the final statement. So things went well. I think our observations, you know, and I'll let Megan speak to some of this, but your accounting records are always well prepared. You know, we work with Mark Porter on a few different municipalities and municipal entities, and he does good work. It's well organized. It really helps us in terms of what we're trying to do. And, you know, he's always well prepared. And I think, Megan, would you have something to offer on the actual field work and how that went?
Sure, that's no problem. So as Andrew mentioned, we came back in July. This year was a little bit different, obviously, with COVID and everything going on. So we were later, but when we came, we were only there for 1 day. We got all our testing done. So majority of our work was prepared around the working papers that Mark Porter prepared. So they're always very well organized, very helpful for us. Definitely makes our job a lot easier because he does a lot of the work beforehand in preparation. And I do want to speak to the fact that this year for the audit, there was no adjusting journal entries. So that really speaks to the quality of the records that you're getting on a month-to-month basis by Jason and his team, and as well by the year-end adjustments and help that Mark provides at year-end to get ready for the audit. So as we were there only 1 day, we got most of our work done in that time frame. And when we came back to the office, Kathy and Jason and Chris are always very accommodating for us. They probably had to do a lot more with uploading documents for this year. So it definitely was a different way of doing the audit, but it went well. As I said, it was only about a 1 month turnaround. So it went very well, I'd say.
Okay. It's been a different beast this year, that's for sure,
Yeah.
with everything.
It's a different experience. It's a different way of doing the auditing. So we have to kind of adjust how we're doing our work. But I can't speak enough to the help that Jason and Kathy, they provide us. Thank you very much, guys.
Perfect.
Thanks, Megan. The last little piece we have just quickly is I wanted to talk about our management letter. So last year, when I say last year, the 2018 engagement was our first year auditing St. George. And so Our management letter last year had 6 points on it.
Mhm.
And as part of our process, we usually follow up in the next year to see how management has responded to our letter. And we noted that 4 of our 6 items that were discussed were the recommendations that we came forth were implemented, and that we looked at them and that they were operating as intended. So that was really good. A couple of points that we discussed further with Jason and his team this year around expenditure authorization and around timesheet and time card approval processes. We'll have a couple of points that we'll put in our letter this year, and we've already talked to Jason about them, and he agrees that there's some improvement there. It's not that there are lack of controls; it's just that these can be tightened up and made more efficient and more, I guess, more quality in terms of their effectiveness. So we'll have that letter. That'll be part of our final package that goes out when the statements, after the statements are approved.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's always refreshing when we make comments and recommendations and they're met with open ears and then implemented. So that's good. We like to see that. And again, I sound like a broken record, but it speaks to the quality of the accounting system and the tone, that the management team has around making
Sure.
intact. All right, that's it.
That's
for us.
everything.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions?
No.
Okay, hearing no questions. Can I get a motion to approve the audit for 2019 financial statements?
I make a motion that we accept the audit report for 2019.
Motion made by Councillor Allison,
I'll second that.
second by Councillor Murray. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. Thank you, Andrew and Megan, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That
Thanks,
was
guys.
very easy to go through. Thank you.
Right.
What we'll do is I'll get Jason to send me the emails of the folks who are going to be signing the financial statements. And we'll use we have an electronic signature system called DocuSign, and I'll send those out so they can go through this and you can put your signature on them. And then when they come back to us, we can publish the statements and get them ready to go to the province.
Perfect. Okay.
And we'll do that tomorrow.
Okay. Jason, you'll let me know.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing as this concludes our special meeting, I would call for an adjournment.
I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Motion made by Councillor Allison,
Second that.
second by Councillor Murray. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
Good
night.
night.
Everybody.
And boom, we're gone.